Content warning. Things can get pretty rough in prison. We're going to be talking about some subjects that some people might find disturbing. Hi, I'm Amelia Saw, and this is On Guard, a podcast about what really goes on inside prison. And it comes from the best source in town, the prison officers. Unlike police, who go looking for the bad guys, each day a prison officer turns up at work, they're guaranteed to find them. Imagine doing a job where every shift was spent rubbing shoulders with Australia's worst criminals. These are the heroes who keep the country's rapists, serial killers and child molesters exactly where the rest of us want them, locked away in prison. But you don't walk away from a job like that unscathed. These guys have got stories. Most of them are shocking, some of them are tragic, and others are just bloody funny. The one thing I can guarantee is that you've never come across anything like it. Alan Butler has seen it all. He spent 32 years working in New South Wales prisons, including Long Bay and Parklea Correctional Centres. And he'll tell you straight, drugs and corruption are everywhere. He's seen drugs smuggled in through babies' nappies, artificial limbs, and hidden in all sorts of orifices. He's witnessed plenty of inmate affairs with staff and even seen criminal gangs try to infiltrate the system by getting their members recruited as officers. Alan retired in 2018 and now enjoys a slower pace of life on the New South Wales North Coast. But he's got no doubt the corruption he witnessed is still alive and well today. Alan, thank you for joining me. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Amelia. How are you?
Good. Now, tell me, you retired a couple of years ago after a very long, 3 decades in corrections sounds pretty long to me. And you survived?
Yes, I survived barely, I think. The last 12 months I sort of stumbled and fumbled my way through, but we got there to the end.
Yeah. And now life, I am imagining, is a lot more relaxing.
Yes, it is. It's very relaxing now. The only stress I have now is when I'm next going to see the grandkids and what damage they'll do to the house and me.
Yeah, a bit different to spending your days dealing with sex offenders and murderers and armed robbers, I imagine.
Very different, yes. Much more different. At least at the end of this, I can get a cuddle and a kiss, and it'll be okay.
Yeah. Hey, so, a lot of your career, well, at least a good chunk of it, was dedicated to kind of working to help eliminate corruption and contraband coming into jails. So, tell me, are there any drugs in prison?
Yes, there are drugs in prison. Brought in predominantly by visitors, and which is demonstrated recently with COVID lockdown, where the prisoners were complaining because they didn't have their drugs.
Yes.
And but there's always that avenue of corrupt staff that either do it for monetary gain, or they will fall in love with an inmate and believe they're helping them. And maybe some of them even join the job with the intent of making a few dollars on the side by bringing drugs in. That one's the hard one to prove. But the other two, certainly I've seen a lot of that, of someone being befriended by an inmate, compromised, they're hooked, they then bring in drugs, mobile phones. We're sure some have tried to bring in weapons. But, it's one of those things that whilst there's a need, there's greed, it'll continue to happen. Someone will want to make money, even if it's a small amount. There was one example of a fellow wanted a new lounge, so he started bringing in steroids.
Oh, my goodness. And so inmates will actually be kind of somehow transferring money to prison officers to bring in contraband for them?
On this instance, what it was a family member of the inmate would go to the officer's house, give him a package and say, please bring this in. give it to my brother when you get in there, and I'll give you $500 to take it in. And he did.
Wow. And he got caught, presumably, because you know about it.
Yes, he did get caught. And he got caught because the inmate was found with contraband.
Right.
And when asked where he got it from, he said, "Oh, well, I'll tell you where I've got it if you let me off the hook," and immediately told on the who the officer was. So, yeah, that's what I mean. You can never befriend the inmate because they'll be the first one to give you up for their own benefit.
What prison did that happen in?
That was at Long Bay back in the late 90s.
Wow. And so that particular prisoner, he didn't receive any kind of punishment?
No, he worked a deal with the ICAC, and they set up a sting operation to catch this officer. And so the inmate was caught with contraband. He said, "I'll make you a deal to catch this corrupt officer," because at the time there's no penalty for an inmate at that time for corrupting a staff member. So they would just go from one staff member to the next staff member, trying to find one that was weak enough to bring in something for them.
And the staff members, you're saying there was real money to be made on their part. That's why they did it?
Yes, yeah, they figured that the overtime and the penalty rates weren't enough, which for the vast majority of staff, say the 99.9% of staff, the overtime and penalty rates are enough, but you've got that small percentage, that 1% of crooked staff, and it could be custodial, non-custodial, and even the nursing staff have been involved. So it crosses all boundaries of uniform and disciplines. So, it's the greed of some people, and others, as I said, they may fall in love with an inmate. And I don't just mean female staff. We've had male staff fall in love with female inmates and give everything to that female inmate as they would with someone on the outside. So, you can't stop people from falling in love, but we've got to be aware that these people, once they do fall in love with an inmate, will do anything for them, just like you and I would do anything for our spouse.
Are any of those female inmates anyone we would know?
I'm just trying to think. There was once, she was a murderer, and I can't remember her name, I'm sorry. But, she'd had killed a man, her partner, and this officer fell in love with her, and he was caught. And he still writes to her, as far as I know. She's staying in forever. She's in for life. And he lost his, he had a wife and child, and he lost everything.
So you believe they're still in a relationship now? Yes,
yeah. I believe that. Well, the last I heard they were. Whether they still are or not, I don't know. But the last I heard, the male officer was still corresponding with her. And then that's love, I suppose.
So what was he bringing in for her?
He was bringing in cosmetics and other little luxuries for her. But contraband is anything that's not approved by the governor of the jail, and that's not prescribed. So whether it was a stick of lipstick or an ounce of heroin, it doesn't matter. It's still trafficking, and it's still corruption.
And this guy got the sack and lost his wife and kids.
Yes, I still can't figure it out. Their inmates will try every officer out, Every officer. They'll walk up to you and ask, how much will it cost for you to bring in some dope for me, Chief? And if you hesitate, there's a possibility here. Or if you tell them, nick off, go away, don't talk to me like that, they'll just move on to somebody else. But they'll keep going. And they'll keep going because they've got nothing to lose. They've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. So they'll just keep on trying until they find someone. And if they know that we're listening to their phone calls, to their families. So that's why mobile phones are so important in the jail, because they can have an unfiltered conversation with the family and organise their drops. So if you want to make some money, you take mobile phones in or SIM cards. It's just one of those high commodity items these days. When I started back in the 80s, it was just drugs and tobacco. Tobacco is back on the books now as contraband because they don't get tobacco in the jails anymore. All jails are non-smoking. So people are being caught smuggling in tobacco. It's again a prized item.
And now for the hard question, how do they get it in there?
Well, visitors in their mouths, in a balloon, they'll kiss the inmate, pass it through. You watch we've seen it on video where the visitor will take it out of the bra, put it in on the table, they'll hold hands, that sort of thing. They're the ways that they do it. There was one that was reported some years ago where the woman came in and she had a syringe attached to the inside of her arm and a tube with a butterfly needle in the end of it. She held hands with the inmate over the table. She inserted the butterfly needle into the vein in his hand, and then she bent her arm like that, and that then pushed the plunger down and shot him up in the viscera.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And that was caught on camera?
Yes. Yeah. That one was caught on camera.
Wow. What jail was that at?
That was at Long Bay in the old CIP, Central Industrial Prison.
And so they got away with it until someone watched back the camera feed?
Yes, yeah, they got that. Well, he came out of the visit to the strip searching area, and he was just off his face, and they couldn't work out why. So they went back over the footage and found how they did it.
I don't want to give them too much credit, but it's quite ingenious, really. I mean, who would think of something like that?
Well, that's right. Another ingenious one was when they were allowed to have guitars and other items sent in. An inmate was discharged and wrote to his mate, I will send you in the gear. And the guitar arrived, the searching staff knew something was coming. They searched the guitar. They just about pulled it to pieces, nothing, gave the prisoner the guitar. He then wrote back saying, where is it? Where's the gear? And he said, all you got to do is lick it. He'd coated it in hash oil.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so you're mentioning the letters now that are being passed between prisoners and people on the outside. Does someone read all of those letters to pick up on things like this?
Yes, yeah, we go. There'll be a post in the jail or in the intelligence office in the jail that they'll go through the mail. Buprenorphine strips are popular, and they would just put them in the envelope in part of the glue. So that would be part of the glue holding it down, or they'd conceal them under the stamps.
Yeah, I've heard about under the stamp.
Or else you'll get a letter and they've sprinkled powder in it, scented powder, but that'll come through, and it'll come through a couple of times and just scented powder. And then say the fifth time it'll come through and it's heroin or cocaine. So we have the sniffer dogs will go through the mail as well to look for something.
You've mentioned a few pretty out there ones. What's the most outrageous thing that you found or you've been aware of someone picking up?
This one was fairly recent. It was whilst I'd been retired, but it's actually somebody I know found it. An inmate went to the local hospital on a hospital escort, and when he came back, the search officer just thought there was something odd. And when he was searching him, he took particular attention to his clothing. And in his jacket, there were a number of mobile phones, a number of SIM cards, all hidden in the jacket where the prisoner had set up an injury to go out to a hospital escort. Someone at the hospital had planted the contraband items, the mobile phones, the drugs, the SIM cards. The inmate's gone to the toilet at the hospital. They were concealed somewhere in that toilet. And he's then loaded his jacket up and then gone back to the jail after the hospital escort.
And so those were picked up by searching just his clothing, is that right?
Yes, yeah, when he returned to the jail. There was no tip-off or anything. It was just one of those things that an officer was just a bit suspicious of the way he was acting, and so gave him a bit of extra attention on the search.
And so after a visit, though, presumably, just a standard contact visit, inmates are pretty well searched?
Yes, the inmates in a maximum security jail wear overalls, and the overalls are zipped up the back with a seal. The cuffs are elasticized so they grip the wrists. They wear jail shoes. So, because one of the other ways they used to swap shoes over during the visit. And, you'd end up with a new pair of Nikes with the soles stuffed with drugs. And so they'll do the search. They look in their mouths, in their hair, behind their ears. But if someone has swallowed it, it's in their intestines, and they'll just crack it out later on. And if you've witnessed them swallowing something, you then put them in a dry cell with a bucket and wait for them for everything to come through in the end.
I mean, it's a pretty, without really spelling it out, it's a pretty disgusting way to get your drugs. Presumably you've got to pick them out of the toilet.
Yeah. Well, there was one prisoner that we saw him get some drugs and stick them up his backside. This was before the days of overalls. And so we knew he had them. We put him in a dry cell, and then he started falling all over the place. So what this inmate has done is he's pulled the pills out of his backside, swallowed them dry that have just come out of his backside with dirty fingers covered in crap, and put it straight in his mouth so he wouldn't get caught with it.
I mean,
that is just great.
Never underestimate the length someone will go to for their drugs.
Yeah, and then we questioned him when he was back to being sober and not under the influence of the drugs, and he immediately put his girlfriend in for bringing them in.
Did she get prosecuted?
No, she got a prohibition on entering the jail.
Right.
So that's one of the things that is the easiest thing for us to do, is to stop someone from coming into the jail for anything up to 2 years. And quite often we'll find that the family member that's been stopped from going to the jail is relieved that there's no more pressure on them to bring the drugs in for their partner. I don't have to visit him. I don't have to bring the gear in.
So they're feeling really, I suppose, really put upon by these people to break the rules and smuggle stuff in for them.
That's right, because the corrective services staff are all watching the main drug dealers So they will get someone that isn't on our radar, and they will force that person with violence to bring in the drugs, to organise it. So they'll tell his family members, if you don't bring in the drugs, we're going to bash your brother, son, husband, whatever, in jail. And then they'll tell the prisoner that if you don't organise it with your family to bring it in, we'll go and we'll bash up your mother, we'll bash up. It's just a horrible situation that some of these people are placed in. I'm not saying they're all good people, but they don't need that extra. It's just something that they don't need extra stress and burden put on their families for the sake of someone running a drug business in custody.
So, do inmates deal drugs to each other? Are they traded?
Yes. Yep. And often the money is transferred outside, so it'll go into accounts. Now there's much more scrutiny on who's placing the money into the inmate's account. Before, anyone could walk up to a jail and say, here's $100, I want to put that in Alan Butler's account. And you just go, yep, fine, what's your name? Give them a receipt and the money's in. So that's just paid for some marijuana or something else. But now we're doing it online so that more information is there. And then the other thing that can be done too is you can track the transactions so that you're looking at who's putting money in for who. And there used to be a number of people that would go to different jails and they were just feeding money into inmates' accounts all over the place because that's how the deals were being made. That's how the transactions were being done.
Goodness, it's a lot too. I see why you say that you feel it's almost sometimes feels almost impossible to get a handle on this because it's so widespread and there are so many people who, as I think you've said before, they have 24 hours a day. If you're inside prison, you have 24 hours a day to think of ways to cheat the system and schemes and whatever else. As a prison officer, you're there on your shift, aren't you? Which is probably about 8
That's
hours.
Right. Yeah. And that's all you're paid to think about that. And then you've got a life outside. You have to leave the jail at the gate when you finish work. Otherwise, it can be depressing enough. It can be stressful at times. And you don't want to be thinking of these things at home. You don't want to take the jail home. And that's another whole story of officers that have found it difficult to make that separation and end up going home and drink too much, domestic violence. Yeah, it's a terrible thing because you're working in an environment of aggression and nobody in the green uniform likes the people in the blue uniform. So they're always out to get you. And, they get kudos for catching us out, for causing us grief. That's why they enjoy the idea of manipulating an officer into doing something criminal. And there are some really good inmates that are exceptional at manipulation. One of them is a sex offender called Graham Harrison. And a classic example of him when I first started looking at him and his history was I looked at his case notes. Now, every inmate has case notes. And those case notes record how their behaviour is, what they're doing on a daily basis or monthly. And all that information is put together to help get them classification, to meet their criminogenic needs, to help them with rehabilitation, and just generally to track how they're going.
Graham Lachlan Harrison was a sexual sadist with a 30-year history of hurting women and children. The serial sex offender is serving a minimum of 27 years for a string of rapes and child sex offences. They include picking up a 17-year-old hitchhiker and making her repeatedly perform sex acts at knife point. As he performed the acts, Harrison ran a knife blade along her neck and scalp, cutting off strands of hair, telling the girl he would mutilate her so she couldn't have children, and that he would throw her off a cliff and bury her in a 1.5 metre grave. Harrison was also convicted of filming himself tying women up and raping them. He threatened to rape their daughters if they did not comply, telling one victim, "You have no idea what I'd do to have sex with little girls. That's my thing." He will be eligible for parole in 2040.
Harrison would manipulate the female staff. So the female staff case notes were glowing. Education officers, welfare, female prison officers, nursing staff, everything was hunky-dory. The male case notes were written saying manipulative, sneaky, he was trying to do this and that. And so you could there was something odd going on. And he was also very well educated, and he probably had more computer skills than most of our computer staff at the time, our IT branch. And it got so bad that he was put on a ban for using any inmate computer in the jail. He was not allowed to go near any IT.
And why was that?
Because he was able to manipulate the system and get access to the outside on the internet. Yeah. And
did he have a computing degree or something, or he was just very intelligent?
Yes, he did have a computing degree.
Right.
Yeah. His main target were the education officers, the female education officers, and an officer at Lithgow ended up having to leave the job because he got her compromised, where he influenced her so much that she started bringing items in for him. And another one at Grafton, when he was at Grafton Jail, she received a package in the mail that was for her to take in with her items of her work items. And she got hesitant and then opened the package and found it was a mobile phone. So he was trying to get her to traffic. And to her credit, she realised what was happening and what he was doing to her. Otherwise, she would have lost her job as well and been completely discredited. He didn't have any romantic relationships with these women, but he would just target the education officers, and they thought he was trying to better himself, to improve his lot, but he was actually using them to feather his own nest inside. He believed that he could supply anything to the other inmates because he could get people to bring it in for him.
There was a story about him that came out a couple of years ago that said he was actually somehow contacting his victims from inside jail to kind of taunt them. Did you hear about that?
Yes. Yeah. And I don't know how he did that, but I heard that he was doing it, and it didn't surprise me at all because that's his nature. All his offences were power-driven. And he got caught because one of his victims threatened him with a Swiss Army knife. And she was tougher than he was. And then he got away from him and gave evidence, and that's how he was captured. But yeah, Swiss Army knives are pretty damn good.
It's interesting that the female staff, though, it sounds like overall they got sucked in, though, from if their case notes were all describing, how would they describe this, a serial sex offender? What kind of things would they write about him?
Oh, that he was working very hard. He's very good at his studies. He's working to better himself. He is going out of his way. Like I said, he would target females, and then you've got other inmates who will target males just because they'll see that they'll overhear an officer talking about a football team, and they'll go, oh yeah, he likes the Dragons or he likes the Tigers, and so they'll strike up a conversation about that, and then they get to talking, and then the officer, before the officer knows, he's telling him about his family, he's telling him about his past and his football career, and then the crook will then say, oh, look, I can get you tickets to a game. And then it starts. And it's something simple like that. Or, oh, yeah, my brother knows Benny Elias, or somebody there. That's just a name I pulled out of the air. But the officer will go, really? And, oh, my son thinks he's fantastic, and they'll get an autograph for him. And so it's all these little steps until they say, right, I want you to do this for me. And it's as simple as that. And they say, oh, no, I can't do that. I said, well, I've done this for you and I've done this for you. How do you think your boss would feel about if we told that? And there was one exact incident where at the old Metropolitan Remand Centre at Long Bay, an officer, a new recruit, he'd hadn't even been in for 12 months. He was saw an inmate there that he actually went to school with. And so they struck up a conversation, and over the weeks they would see each other regularly. And then the inmate said, oh, look, I missed the mail. I've really got to get this letter out to my mum. Can you take it out for me? And so the officer went, oh, no, look, he said, oh, look, it's really important. You've got to take it to mum. So he did. And a few days later, he said, I want you to go back to mum's and bring something in for me. And that's how it started. And that officer was actually relieved when he got caught. A lot of corrupt conduct starts out as dumb conduct, where they're just dumb, and then it just billows from there.
Yeah, slippery slope, it sounds like.
Oh, that's right. And then as soon as the inmate is caught with contraband, he immediately tells, oh, yes, well, John Smith got it in for me.
You mentioned that in some of your investigations you found there were some instances where inmates had managed to actually recruit family members into corrective services to do their bidding for them.
It's more, there were some inmates that were attempting to get family members into the department. And there, I don't know how many was actually successful, but I know the ones that we uncovered where the individuals just couldn't help themselves in big noting themselves about who they knew. And that would be picked up at the academy. But the threat is there that organised crime can just get a sleeper in there. And, there was an incident that Mr. Woodham uncovered where a recruit had joined the department, had expressed an interest in going into the Special Purpose Centre, which is where the protected witnesses are held. And the purpose of that person to get a job was to bump off one of the witnesses. And that when that person was confronted by the Internal Investigations Branch at the time, the next day they never turned up for training at the academy, and no one ever saw them again.
Now, there was one particular family who has a pretty formidable reputation in the prison community, which is the Kalachi family. This is a family where 3 of the brothers have served time for attempted murder, a 4th was convicted of murder, and Nasser Kalachi was jailed in 2009 over a $2 million mortgage fraud case. So Nasser also, had his own, I suppose, fingers in pies on the inside, didn't he?
Well, that's right. Even before that matter, he'd been in previously, and when he was in previously, he manipulated the work release program as it was at that time and got himself employed at his own smash repair company. He was the manager of the smash repair company, Mirror Image Smash Repair at Yagoona. And he ended up getting himself employed by his own company while on works release, and then was able to continue the family business while he was out. That matter of Kalachi and another inmate of Contoranakis, they were the catalyst for Mr. Woodham to start up a pre-release leave program where they took the works release away from the jails and to a central location so that the inmates didn't have any contact with the decision makers, because the decision makers were in the jail. And, we ended up with an officer involved with Kalachi. The officer was having some money trouble. So the inmate organised him to have a house at Guildford, to rent it from them very cheaply. And this officer lived in that home with his wife. Contoranakis paid for this officer to have holidays. Contoranakis paid for this officer's wife's surgery on her eyes, all for favours whilst he was in custody.
Oh, I see. And what kind of favours? Do you know what he was getting in return?
Made sure he got works release, for a start. Made sure that whilst he was on works release, that he could continue his his criminal activities by telling him whether there are inspectors available, that field officers would go out and see the inmates. He did that for Contoranakis. He did that for Kalachi. He did that for a number of other inmates. He also made sure that when Kalachi and others were coming back into the jail, that they weren't searched, so that they were able to bring in whatever contraband they wanted into the jail. And this officer was brought to the attention of corrective services and the ICAC by an inmate informant who he'd been helping. It's the same story again.
Let's talk about an inmate you did have something to do with, and that's Neddy Smith. So, for those who don't know, Mr. Smith has a rap sheet that includes drug trafficking, theft, rape, armed robbery, murder, and he's someone that Alan got to know.
In 1994, Arthur Neddy Smith was secretly recorded in jail, allegedly confessing to 7 murders to his cellmate. Magistrate Pat O'Shane dismissed 4 of the murder charges, claiming the evidence was inadequate to convict Smith. But today Smith was told he'd go to trial on the remaining 3 counts for allegedly strangling Sydney prostitute Sally Ann Huckstep in Sydney's Centennial Park in 1986, for the alleged killing of brothel proprietor Harvey Jones, whose skeletal remains were found in sand dunes at Botany Bay, and for the murder of drug dealer Luton Shue.
Neddy is literally a larger-than-life character. He before Parkinson's took control, he had a huge physical presence, and but then as he got sick, things started slowing down for him. But he wrote a book with an author on the outside, and it then became a mini-series called Blue Murder. And officers would get a copy of the book and they'd bring it down for him to sign, get an autograph. And Neddy was, I couldn't believe that the officers were doing this, but one of them said, "Oh yeah, one day this is going to be big money. I'll be able to sell it." But as his Parkinson's and his physical condition deteriorated, you wouldn't know whether it was his handwriting or not. You couldn't get the provenance of it to actually get any value. And then he was also making clocks in the jail and selling them. And he would have his photo on the cover of it, on the face of the clock, just a photocopy photo of himself.
How did he get that? Obviously through an officer did them up for him.
He asked permission to make the photocopies because he was going to sell the clocks, and the department would get a percentage of the sale because they provided some of the materials. And they thought, yeah, why not? Neddy can do that. So everything was going along well until he decided to put pictures of his alleged victims on the face of the clocks. So, there's a picture of Sally Ann Huckstep and somebody else would appear, and that's when it was all put a stop to. He just thought he could get away with it. And he thought it was a good joke to put Sally Ann Huckstep's face on the clock.
So he thought it was funny.
Why? He thought it was funny, yeah.
And creepy, very, very creepy.
Oh, yeah.
One other thing that I wanted to ask, are the night shifts different to the day shifts? I think people have this idea in their minds that all the mischief will go on at night. Is that true?
There's stuff does happen overnight. You'll have items passed from cell to cell of a night where they've got access to windows. And even if they don't have an access to a window, it was at Parklea Correctional Centre where they have perspex in the doors at the observation portal. So the inmates actually burnt holes through the perspex so they could pass stuff to the next cell. And they would have behind the cells, outside the cells at Long Bay in 3 and 4 wing, there was no glass panes or anything in the windows. They just had bars, but they would run lines of string or cotton, and they would then pass items along the string to the next cell where they could swing it like a pendulum and catch it, or they'd already have strung the line during the day, and they would just pull it through at night time.
Once again, when there is a will, there is a way.
That's right.
All right, it's about time for our prison pop quiz, the segment where I get corrections officers to decode the slang used behind bars, and it is truly disgusting.
Do you know how to handle a Roscoe?
No. What's a Roscoe?
A Roscoe. It's a gun.
A gun. Ah. All right.
Yeah, and I never knew that myself, and we did a telephone intercept where the inmate that we were listening to said, and make sure you go around to John Smith's and get a Roscoe. And what's a Roscoe? And I ended up going down into the jail and asking another prisoner who used to give me information what a Roscoe was, and he's going, it's a gun.
That's
idiot.
Funny.
It's a gun. Yeah. And a Roscoe. And another term was make sure you put the flower. Are you putting the flowers on Mum's grave this afternoon?
Right.
On Sunday.
And what does that mean?
So the visit's happening on Sunday, and the person's bringing in the drugs.
The flowers on Mum's grave. That's a pretty good one.
Yeah,
I wouldn't
flowers
see
on
through
Mum's
that.
grave on Sunday.
And do you have a third one just to round it off?
Oh, just the swear to God, mate. Swear to God on my children's, whether they've got kids or not, but they'll swear it on their children, and that's when they're telling the truth.
Yeah, right. Alan, thank you very much. You've been a very interesting interview. You've certainly got a lot of stories, and I'm glad now your days of all things corruption and drug related are over. Well, at least not that you were personally involved, but you know what I mean. And thank
Yes,
you
I
for
know what
talking
you
to
mean.
me.
It was a pleasure.
Alan Butler encountered all sorts in his 3 decades working in prisons. He's seen corruption flourish and countless officers lose their jobs because they've been sucked in by devious inmates. In episode 3, we meet Jennifer Cashow, a former South Australian prison officer who has rubbed shoulders with the country's worst female offenders. Her stories are truly shocking and show that life inside a women's prison is nothing like you see on TV.